They were laughing on Friday, the man whispered to the cold marble. How can children who laughed on Friday be gone by Sunday? Ethan Carter knelt in the cemetery, his tailored black coat soaked through by morning dew, his wealth meaningless against the gray stone bearing the names of his twin sons. Beside him, his wife Claire pressed her forehead to the grave, her shoulders shaking her sobs, breaking the silence like glass. 3 months ago, Noah and Lucas, 5 years old, strong, full of life, had been declared dead. Natural causes, the doctors said. Clean words, empty words. Ethan was a man who could buy solutions. Hospitals listened when he spoke. Lawyers returned his calls in seconds. But standing there, staring at 2 smiling faces etched into stone, he felt smaller than he ever had. Something inside him refused to accept it. Children don't just vanish. Then a voice cut through the grief. "Mister, they're not here." Ethan looked up, startled. A little black girl stood a few steps away, barefoot, dress torn, eyes wide, but steady. Her name, he would soon learn, was Aaliyah. She pointed toward the grave, then back toward the road. "Your boys," she said softly, almost afraid of the truth herself. "They're alive. They live where I sleep." The world tilted. Claire gasped. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. 5-year-old twins, an orphanage, a child with nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking. In that moment, grief cracked open into something sharper, hope mixed with terror. Because if Aaliyah was telling the truth, then their sons hadn't died. They had been taken, and nothing about Ethan Carter's life would ever be the same again. Ethan rose slowly, as if the air itself had turned to glass around him. "What did you say?" His voice came out hoarse, barely louder than the wind moving through the cemetery trees. The girl didn't run. She didn't smile. She didn't beg. She just stood there, small shoulders tense, hands clenched at her sides like she was holding on to courage with everything she had. "They're not dead," she repeated. "I know their names. Noah and Lucas. They sleep on the mattress next to mine." Claire staggered to her feet. How do you know their names?" she asked, one hand pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with fear and hope colliding all at once. The girl swallowed. "Because of the bracelets," she said. "Blue for Noah, green for Lucas. They cry at night. They call for their mom." Something inside Ethan cracked clean, sharp, and final. His knees weakened, and he grabbed the edge of the gravestone to stay upright. No stranger could invent details like that. No child would carry this kind of terror in her eyes for a lie. Where Ethan whispered, "Where did you see them?" The girl hesitated, glancing over her shoulder, as if the shadows themselves were listening. "An orphanage," she said quietly. "On the east side. Nobody asks questions there. Kids just appear." She lowered her voice even more. "They were brought in late. A white car. 2 men. The boys were shaking." Claire let out a sound that wasn't quite a cry, wasn't quite a prayer. Ethan felt her hand clutch his sleeve like she might disappear if she let go. The girl looked down at her bare feet. "My name is Aaliyah," she added. "I hide them sometimes, from the grown-ups. They get scared." Ethan knelt in front of her, then his expensive coat brushing against the dirt, his wealth erased in a single motion. He looked at her the way a drowning man looks at the surface of the water. "If what you're saying is true," he said, his voice breaking despite himself, "you didn't just find my sons." Aaliyah finally met his eyes. "You saved them." And in the space between that grave and that fragile truth, grief began to loosen its grip, replaced by something far more dangerous. Hope. The city changed as they followed Aaliyah. Tall buildings gave way to cracked sidewalks, bright storefronts to flickering streetlights. Ethan had lived in this city his entire life, owned pieces of its shaped skylines with his signature, but he had never seen this part. Claire's heels sank into mud as she walked, her hand locked around Ethan's, as if letting go might shatter what little hope they had left. The orphanage stood at the end of a narrow street like a forgotten thought. 3 stories. peeling paint. Windows patched with cardboard. The air smelled of damp concrete and something older neglect. Aaliyah slipped through a side door and motioned for silence. "Adults don't listen to kids here," she whispered. "We're invisible." Each step up the wooden stairs creaked like a warning. Ethan's heart pounded so loudly he was certain it would give them away. Then he heard it. A sound so small it almost broke him. Crying. Claire stopped breathing. "That's them," she whispered, not asking, knowing. Aaliyah nodded. "Please," she said gently. "Don't rush. They're scared of grown-ups." Ethan swallowed every instinct screaming inside him and let the girl lead. She pushed open a door no bigger than a closet, no beds, just thin blankets on the floor. And there they were. Noah and Lucas sat curled into each other, dirty thinner than Ethan remembered, eyes too big for their faces. Alive. Breathing. Real. Claire collapsed to her knees, a sound tearing from her chest that was half sob, half prayer. Ethan's vision blurred as he dropped beside her, his body shaking uncontrollably. The boys shrank back instinctively, hiding behind Aaliyah. "It's okay," she whispered, kneeling beside them. "You're safe. Look." Ethan lowered himself to their level. "Noah. Lucas. It's Daddy." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Noah's brow furrowed. Recognition flickered. His lip trembled. "Daddy," he whispered. That single word shattered everything. Noah ran into Ethan's arms. Lucas following a second later, clinging to Claire as if letting go would mean disappearing again. They cried together on that filthy floor, 4 broken hearts stitching themselves back together. And standing beside them, Aaliyah watched quietly. Because sometimes the smallest hands carry the heaviest miracles. They didn't leave the orphanage right away. Noah and Lucas clung to Aaliyah as if she were the floor beneath their feet, the only thing that hadn't disappeared on them before. Ethan noticed it the way the boys leaned toward her, the way their breathing only slowed when she stayed close. Gratitude rose in him like a wave, heavy and humbling. Then Aaliyah spoke again, softer this time. "Careful. There's something else." Ethan felt his spine tighten. "Tell me." She looked toward the broken window where dusk was bleeding into night. "A woman comes here sometimes. Not like the others." Aaliyah searched for the right words. "She smells expensive. Her clothes are clean. Her hair is always perfect." The girl's brow furrowed. "She cries at the gate. But not like sad people cry. Like scared people." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. Perfect hair, expensive perfume, controlled tears. Claire saw it hit him before he spoke. "Ethan," she whispered. A name surfaced in his mind like a bruise pressed too hard. Victoria Hale, his ex-wife, the woman who never forgave him for leaving, who never accepted that he had built a new life, a new family, a happiness she could no longer control. The woman who smiled in public and punished in silence. She had brown hair, Ethan asked, already knowing the answer. Aaliyah nodded. "She watches. She never comes inside." Claire's hands began to shake. "You think she—" Ethan closed his eyes. The puzzle pieces slid together with terrifying clarity. The rushed paperwork. The flawless death certificates. The doctor no one could trace. A tragedy too clean to be real. "She didn't want them dead," he said, slowly, anger burning through his chest. "She wanted them gone. Gone from him. From Claire. From the life she wasn't part of anymore." Aaliyah shifted closer to the boys. "She scares me," she said honestly. "Like she did something bad and doesn't know how to undo it." Ethan crouched in front of her, his voice steady, but his eyes dark with promise. "You were brave to tell us, and you won't face her again. I swear." Outside night fully settled, and somewhere beyond those cracked walls, a woman with too much money and too much resentment had just lost control of the secret she thought was buried. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. That night the house felt different. Noah and Lucas slept curled together on the guest bed, their small chests rising and falling in uneven rhythm, while Aaliyah lay on the floor beside them, one hand resting lightly on the blanket as if guarding the line between nightmare and safety. Only when she was there did the boys finally let go. Ethan watched from the doorway for a long moment before turning away. In his office, grief gave way to something colder. Claire spread the documents across the desk with trembling hands. Death certificates, hospital reports, signatures that once felt final. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing. "The time of death. Same minute, same handwriting, same ink." Ethan leaned closer. His jaw tightened. "That's not medicine," he said. "That's choreography." They searched the doctor's name. Nothing. No medical license, no registry, no trace. A man who didn't exist had pronounced their sons dead. Claire's breath caught. "Ethan, this was planned." His phone buzzed. One message, unknown number. "You should have let it go." The words burned into his screen. Claire went pale. "They know." Ethan stood slowly, rage moving through him like a current. He made the calls, his lawyer, a private investigator, an old friend in the police department. Power, influence, favors owed. For the first time since the cemetery, his resources had purpose again. The next morning, they went to the hospital. The administrator's smile was tight. Too tight. Those files, he stammered, clicking through screens. "They appear to be missing. A system error." "How convenient," Claire said sharply. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "People don't vanish," he said quietly. "Files don't delete themselves. And lies always leave fingerprints." Outside the city moved on like nothing had happened. But Ethan knew the truth now. Someone had forged death to steal life. Someone had signed his sons into silence and expected him to grieve politely, to move on, to accept the impossible. He thought of Aaliyah, barefoot brave, carrying truth no one asked her to carry. And as Ethan Carter looked at the skyline he once ruled, one thing became clear. This wasn't about loss anymore. This was about exposure. And the truth was coming for everyone involved. They went back to this orphanage with daylight lawyers' guards and a sense of urgency that tasted like metal in Ethan's mouth. Aaliyah held Noah and Lucas close as the adults searched the building room by room. "Stay here," she whispered to them. "My hiding place. It's safe." The boys nodded, trusting her the way children trust someone who never leaves. Minutes later, the shouting stopped. Ethan returned to this room first, and the air dropped out of his lungs. The blankets were gone. The corner was empty. A sharp, burned smell lingered, wrong and recent. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." Ethan rushed forward. On the floor, boot prints. Large, heavy. Drag marks scored the dust like a violent signature. And they're caught on a nail, a strip of torn fabric. Lucas's shirt. "They took them again," Ethan said, his voice shaking with fury. "They took all of them." The investigator crouched, tracing the marks. They went toward the restricted wing. "No staff goes there." Ethan didn't wait. The corridor was dark, choked with debris, and rats scattering at their feet. Claire followed, breath-ragged fear burning into resolve. Every step echoed with the same thought: I failed them again. Then muffled crying. They burst into a forgotten room. Noah. Lucas. Aaliyah. Tied. Shaking. Alive. Before Ethan could move, a masked man bolted for a broken window, disappearing into the alley beyond. Ethan dropped to his knees, ripping the ropes free, pulling the children into his chest as if he could fuse them there by force alone. "He said we'd disappear again," Noah sobbed. Aaliyah trembled, but stood tall. "I didn't let go," she said. "I promised." On the floor near where the man had stood lay a small object that caught the light, a gold brooch, initials engraved VH. Claire picked it up with shaking fingers. "Victoria," she said, certainty hardening her voice. "It's her." Ethan looked at his children, at Aaliyah, and something settled in his eyes. This wasn't fear anymore. This was war, and he was done running. They didn't make it 10 steps into the parking lot before the trap closed. A white car slid in front of them, tires crunching over gravel, blocking the exit like a final answer. The engine purred calmly, confidently. The driver's door opened. Victoria Hale stepped out. She looked flawless, tailored coat, polished heels, hair smooth as glass. Not a single strand out of place. Only her eyes betrayed her hollow and cold, like a house long abandoned. "Ethan," she said lightly, as if greeting him at a charity gala. "You were always so dramatic." Ethan moved instinctively, placing himself between her and the children. Noah and Lucas clutched Aaliyah's hands. Claire felt her body shake, not with fear, but with rage. "You did this," Ethan said, his voice low and steady. "You forged their deaths. You stole my sons." Victoria smiled. "Not denial. Not shame. Of course I did." She tilted her head. "You took my life apart piece by piece. I simply returned the favor." Claire stepped forward. "They're children," she said, tears burning her eyes. "You turned their lives into paperwork. Graves. Trauma. They weren't supposed to die." Victoria snapped, suddenly the mask cracking. "They were supposed to disappear. Somewhere I could control. Somewhere you couldn't reach." Aaliyah's grip tightened. Victoria glanced at her with open contempt. "And this little girl ruined everything." Before Ethan could speak, sirens screamed into the night. Red and blue lights flooded the lot. Police cars surrounded them. Doors slammed. A familiar voice called out, "Victoria Hale, you're under arrest." Victoria's smile returned, thin, sharp. "You think this ends me?" she whispered, as handcuffs closed around her wrists. "I have money. Lawyers." Ethan met her gaze unflinching. "I have the truth," he said, "and my children alive." As she was led away, Noah buried his face in Ethan's coat. Lucas clung to Claire. Aaliyah stood quietly, shoulders trembling, but she didn't cry. The danger was over. The damage was not. But under the flashing lights, with truth finally breathing in the open air, one thing was certain: she had lost. And they were still standing. The truth didn't surface all at once. It bled out slowly, painfully, like a wound that could no longer stay hidden. Within days, the investigation unraveled everything Victoria had buried under money and influence. The fake doctor never existed. The signatures were traced. The hospital staff, who had been paid to look away, began to talk, some out of fear, others out of guilt, that had kept them awake at night. Surveillance footage appeared. Phone records connected names. The story collapsed in on itself. Victoria Hale was charged with fraud, conspiracy, child abduction, and obstruction of justice. In the courtroom, she sat perfectly still, spine straight, face composed. Noah and Lucas were not there. Ethan refused to let them see her again. Some evils didn't deserve a child's memory. Aaliyah sat between Ethan and Claire, her feet barely touching the floor, hands folded in her lap. She didn't understand every word, but she understood enough. She watched as the woman who had once terrified her was no longer powerful, just exposed. When the sentence was read, 30 years, the room exhaled. Victoria didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply turned and looked at Ethan one last time, searching for something. Control. Regret. Mercy. She found none. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Ethan said nothing. He only knelt in front of Aaliyah and spoke softly. "You told the truth when it mattered," he said. "Because of you, this ends." She nodded, eyes shining not with pride, but relief. That night back home, the house was quiet in a new way. Not hollow, not broken. Peaceful. Noah and Lucas slept deeply for the first time in months. Claire sat on the edge of their bed, long after they drifted off, brushing hair from their foreheads, whispering promises she intended to keep. Ethan stood in the doorway watching all of them. Justice hadn't erased the pain, but it had given the pain a boundary. And sometimes that's how healing begins, not when the past disappears, but when it finally loses its power. Months later, the sound of laughter returned, soft at first, like something unsure it was allowed to exist. Ethan stood in the backyard as Noah and Lucas took turns on the swing, their feet kicking at the air, their laughter uneven but real. The scars were still there, nightmares that woke them crying, sudden flinches at loud noises, but therapy was helping. Love was helping more. Claire spread a blanket on the grass, sunlight warming her face as she watched them. She smiled the way people do when joy feels fragile, when they're afraid it might disappear if they look at it too hard. And then there was Aaliyah. She sat at the edge of the blanket wearing a simple yellow dress that still felt strange against clean skin, holding a melting popsicle with both hands. Her hair was neatly braided now. Her shoes fit. But sometimes she still looked around as if waiting for someone to tell her it wasn't hers to keep. "Mr. Ethan?" she asked quietly. He turned. "Yeah, sweetheart. Am I really staying?" The question hit him harder than any courtroom verdict ever had. Ethan knelt in front of her grass, dampening his knees, and met her eyes, the same eyes that had stood unblinking in a cemetery when truth was too heavy for most adults to carry. "You stayed when others walked away," he said gently. "You protected my sons when you had nothing. You told the truth when it was dangerous." His voice softened. "If you want to, this is your home." Aaliyah's breath caught. "Forever." Claire joined them, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Forever," she said. Aaliyah didn't cry right away. She just nodded slowly, like someone afraid joy might be a trick. Then Noah ran over and grabbed her hand. "Come push us," he said. "Your family." That's when she broke. Later, as the sun dipped low, the four of them sat together on the grass, stitched together by loss, bound by survival, held together by choice. It wasn't the family anyone planned, but it was the one that stayed. And sometimes that makes all the difference. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, barefoot, unnoticed, carrying truth no one asked for. Ethan often thought about that morning in the cemetery. How a child with nothing but courage changed the direction of an entire family. Looking at Aaliyah now laughing as Noah and Lucas chased fireflies across the yard, it felt unreal that the same girl once slept on concrete and guarded frightened twins in the dark. Pain hadn't vanished. Some nights were still hard. Some memories still hurt. But the house no longer felt like a place haunted by loss. It felt alive. Ethan learned something money never taught him. The people who save us rarely look powerful. They don't wear suits. They don't have influence. They don't even feel safe themselves. Yet they stay. They speak when silence would be easier. They protect when others turn away. Aaliyah didn't just help bring 2 children home. She reminded grown adults what courage really looks like. And maybe that's the truth we forget too often in real life. The greatest miracles don't come from strength. They come from compassion. Never underestimate the impact of one brave voice. Sometimes you are the only one who sees the truth. Sometimes you are the only one who can speak up. And sometimes doing the right thing, even when you're afraid, changes more lives than you'll ever know. If this story touched something in your heart, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what part moved you the most? And if you believe stories like this still matter, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Because maybe, just maybe, you were meant to hear this.